Right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in mid-April, the end of your semester. We are so excited about our presentation today. I'm Allison Korn. I'm the clinical professor and director of the Health Justice Clinic at Duke Law School. And I'm so happy to welcome you to our Teaching Justice webinar series. Today, the topic is Teaching Justice Through Reparations, a cross-clinic collaboration. And we are thrilled to feature Lynnise Pantin, Amber Baylor, and Tomica Saul, all from Columbia Law, who are presenting on matters today of social equity and reparations.
Hey everyone, I'm Layla Halas. I'm a clinical law professor at Tulane. I am with Allison, the co-chair of the Teaching Justice Webinar Subcommittee, which is a part of the Best Practices in Pedagogy Committee of CLIA. It's been a really amazing series. We're really thrilled to be here today, and for the several years we've had of innovative teachers talking about the various intersections of justice and incorporating social movements. This is our last session of the year, big finale, and we're already planning next year. So we're really thrilled. We invite you to stay tuned to CLIA's website, as well as the clinic and Lextern listservs and other listservs for updates about the upcoming year.
We do want to let you know, you probably got the indication already, that this session is being recorded. We will make it available to you through the CLIA website. We'll circulate that information after the session concludes. During the session today, we do encourage you to use the chat function if you have a question or a comment. There will be some time at the end to answer burning questions that you may have for our presenters. We do ask everyone to please mute their microphones during the presentation, but certainly if you're able and you'd like to, please keep your video on. And so with that, I will turn it over to our amazing presenters. Again, we're so thrilled to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Allison and Layla. We're excited to be here. I'm Lynnise Pantin, and I just want to say thank you to CLIA for having us, and a special thank you to Layla and Allison for the opportunity and invitation to share our work with you. I think three of us have appreciated the chance to look back and reflect on our work. I'm here with my colleagues, Amber Baylor and Tomica Saul, and we are going to discuss a framework of lawyering towards reparations in a cross-clinic collaboration centered on cannabis social equity initiatives in New York. Cannabis social equity projects were created to address harms from the drug war, and they meet reparative goals in mostly Black and Latinx communities. As a part of that work, we have focused on how cities, primarily focused on in New York City, how cities have adopted cannabis social equity projects and how they are engaging in reparations frameworks in their policy makings. So for today's webinar, we're gonna first, we will introduce what our clinics do. And Tomica, I think you're gonna advance the slides, right?
Yes, okay.
So our roadmap today is that we're going to introduce what our clinics do and explain kind of the underpinnings of this collaboration. Then we're going to provide an overview of the cannabis legislation landscape in New York, and then outline the reparations framework for the war on drugs and social equity licensing. Then we're going to describe our clinic projects in the cannabis social equity space. We're going to report on the benefits of a collaboration like this one, and then we're going to sketch out some of our current and aspirational teaching strategies and reflect on some challenges in doing this work. And then we're going to end with some takeaways about reparations lawyering. And Amber, I think you're going to talk about, starting to talk about your clinic.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Baylor. I direct the criminal defense clinic at Columbia. Lynnise and Tomica are my colleagues in the clinical program. Just by way of background, so you have a sense of what the collaboration is like, what we're all bringing to this collaborative effort. My clinic is, we engage in misdemeanor defense. So we represent people largely who are facing misdemeanor charges in Manhattan. We also do some work for our organizational client, which we engage in policy advocacy for member-led organizations here in Harlem, primarily organizations that are attempting efforts, policy that decriminalizes their member community.
Hi, hello everyone. Again, my name is Tomica Saul, and I also teach in the Entrepreneurship and Community Development Clinic with Lynnise. Our clinic is a transactional clinic that has a community economic development focus. We provide legal services to small business owners, solo entrepreneurs, community organizations, and nonprofits who couldn't otherwise afford legal services, legal representation. Our clients are usually low to moderate income, and many of them come from historically disadvantaged groups, including some who have been justice impacted, which is why this project was really interesting to us. And Lynnise is now going to talk more about how this collaboration came about between our two clinics.
Yeah, so our project followed the announcement by the governor of the Seating Opportunity Act. This particular policy or legislation prioritized marijuana retail licenses for people who were formerly convicted under New York's marijuana laws, or if they were closely related to a person with a conviction. The program was one of many existing or emerging cannabis social equity projects around the country. These social equity projects offer opportunities with the new cannabis economy as one form of repair for the devastation of the war on drugs in communities of color. So when the governor announced the Seating Opportunity Act, Tomica and I approached Amber about possibly working together on a project related to the new social equity policies. We weren't sure what that would look like, but we thought there could possibly be something there, as several of our clients expressed a desire to develop businesses around state legalization of cannabis possession and use. And we knew that Amber also had worked on some expungement work and also had defended clients who had marijuana convictions. So we were looking for a way that it would work for both of us too, because we would also love the opportunity to work together. And so we were just seeking out, thinking about ideas that we could make a collaboration work. It turns out that our collaboration ended up focusing on reparations for cannabis legalization and social equity schemes. And although a collaboration between an entrepreneurship clinic and a criminal defense clinic may seem like an atypical collaboration, our clinics share several commonalities. Our respective clinics represent both individual clients as well as pursue larger policy projects or advocacy. And so we sort of cited our collaboration in sort of the policy frame of our clinic. And so our policy work has implications for the larger community beyond our individual clients. We also serve in and support sort of the same community. Our clinics are located in Harlem and we serve that community. So there's community also implied in the reparative project of the social equity plans. And so we felt that that really made a nice fit really nicely in with our policy advocacy goals of our clinics. So we see our collaboration as a unique opportunity to work across different realms of expertise and forms of legal services in furtherance of drug war reparations in the community that our clinics are situated in. As people are entering the webinar, we'd love for you to put in the chat what clinics you teach and what clinic collaborations you may have participated in, because we'd love to know what collaborations exist amongst this group today. Tomica is going to talk a little bit about the legislation, the legalization landscape in New York, just to give everyone a common understanding of the legislation.
Okay, so the passage of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which I'm just going to shorthand as MRTA going forward, was the impetus for our collaboration. So MRTA was passed in 2021, as Lynnise said, and its main purpose was to legalize recreational marijuana in New York State. And currently only 21 states in the US have passed measures of this sort. So MRTA is a very comprehensive bill and it has a lot of sub-functions. One, it's responsible for regulating an entirely new industry, the cannabis industry. It also lays out the taxation structure for the cannabis industry, which you could think of sort of as the money-making portion of the bill. It also revisits the criminalization of marijuana going forward, and it changes the criminal possession limits, and it also places a legal age on the use of marijuana, which is 21, if anyone was wondering. And also MIRTA lays out the social equity program, which is the central question of our joint scholarship. So the social equity bill, and Amber will get into this more in the next section, but many states have included language about the devastation of the war on drugs in the preambles for the legalization legislation. So in New York, the legislative intent, they acknowledge that, and I'm quoting, existing marijuana laws have disproportionately impacted African-American and Latinx communities, and that the purpose of the legislation was to end the racially disparate impacts of the existing cannabis laws. So it's clear that this bill was intended to serve a reparative function, and we're sort of considering whether the MIRTA's social equity program is adequate reparations for survivors of the war on drugs, just for context. So what does the social equity program actually do? You can think about it as two different parts. So the first part is that it's focusing on entrepreneurship. And that's really through awarding licenses to sell recreational marijuana. It gives social equity applicants priority access to those licenses. And actually, there have been, or the goal is that 50% of all licenses to sell marijuana are going to social equity applicants. And those are really defined as individuals who have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, and also includes other historically disadvantaged groups. The second function of the social equity program is that almost all of the revenue from the sale of marijuana in New York is going to go back into the community. It's either going to go into the education fund or goes to drug treatment. And the law actually sets up this community reinvestment grant fund, which basically is going to issue the money through grants to nonprofits and local governments that have been affected by the war on drugs. When New York came out, or when the Seeding Opportunity Initiative was passed, it was really lauded as one of the more progressive of the social equity policies across the country. It does a few things differently, and it really has sort of learned from other states how to really structure this in a way that puts social equity applicants first. So one way they do that is that they've really taken care in the drafting of the language to keep big businesses out and keep the market really small and intimate. It's drafted in a way that sort of blocks wealthy investors and big businesses so that these social equity applicants really have a chance to thrive. The program also reduces barriers to entry for historically disadvantaged groups. And it's hard enough being an entrepreneur from a historically disadvantaged group. And so the law really acknowledges that, and it provides, well, an example of that is by providing turnkey leases to folks who are opening dispensaries, or they also have access to capital. They have a fund that is like directly giving capital to the folks who are applying for these licenses. And there's also different levels of practical business support. They have incubators, there are mentorship programs so that these businesses thrive. And another way that New York really gives the social equity applicants a head start is just in the sale of recreational marijuana. The first dispensaries have already opened that are owned by social equity applicants, whereas if you're a non-equity applicant, the application process hasn't even started for you yet. So they really want to give these applicants a first mover advantage in the market, which is really important, and they sort of learn from the failings of other states. So that's really the overview of MIRTA, and I'm going to just pass it back to Amber now, who's going to talk about the reparations framework that we use in our project.
Thanks, Tomica. So all of this was very new to me, and I also don't have the language of business law, and so this project was one that really which was sort of challenging for me to sort of learn that language from my field. But one of the things that I grasped on right away too, and that sort of an intersection of interest with Tomica and Lynnise, was this idea of a real explicit effort towards repair in our communities. And so, as Tomica mentioned, within the language of these policies being the cannabis social equity policies, there's language that's explicit about the harm to our communities, what our communities are due, and what we need. And for all of us, that was an opportunity that we may not have had in our day-to-day work to really think about a vision of reparations, and one that cities and states had bought into, at the very least, in the language that they were using in describing why the social equity programs were important and a necessary component to the opening and emerging marijuana economies. And so we delved into this project in New York, but also wanted to learn more about this framework of repair that New York had adopted in its language, and that was sort of replicated in the policy language in different social equity programs around the country. And so in learning more about the frameworks of repair, we began to speak with experts and advocates and organizers that really had been at the helm of decriminalization, but also creating these repair projects or pushing states towards some efforts to repair the decimation to our communities that is happening through the war on drugs. And so in thinking about repair and reparations, we needed to know sort of what the scope of the harm was and is. And it seemed like, in what we were hearing from people and seeing in the language of the policy, the social equity policies, that much of the scope of harm that the repair was directed towards was really the policing practices and policies and economic marginalization that's occurred through the policies of the war on drugs. And so we have sort of framed within this reparation, we've adopted that framework within our reparations-based lawyering and these projects, and really centered in on the war on drugs as the source of harm that these efforts should be directing repair towards. Now, certainly there is language and policies that speak directly to criminalization of communities through marijuana regulation, and so it's not as broad as thinking about the harm of criminalization of drugs broadly. But for us, it didn't make sense to really exceptionalize marijuana criminalization or to silo it off from the war on drugs broadly, in part because suspicion of marijuana leads to searches and provides just sort of one tool for invasive policing. And policing of all sorts might result in somebody having a charge of marijuana. And so we saw the criminalization of marijuana as being wrapped up in one tool, one aspect of a larger war on drugs, the larger practices and policies of the war on drugs. In addition, the scope of harm could be viewed more broadly. So certainly the types and forms of policing, the criminalization of Black and Latinx people that served as the premise for the war on drugs tracks back to anti-Black criminalization from the time of enslavement. And so, there is an argument that perhaps repair could be viewed to encompass a more broad harm than the policies that specifically came from sort of the federal campaign of the war on drugs. But for us, we see that this campaign is one sort of iteration of that larger history of criminalizing Black communities. And it's a useful scope in thinking about direct harms and direct repairs that can come from decriminalization and projects like cannabis social equity projects. So in thinking about what reparative frameworks might apply and evaluating the components of social equity projects, we've turned to the UN, or an international framework for repair. It's a robust framework within the international community. It's mainstream, not marginalized. And also it's a framework that many advocates were using and pushing cities and states towards social equity projects. And so you'll see sort of portions of that framework also in some of the language of the social equity policies. So very briefly, that framework includes important components of a reparations project, or essential components of a reparations project. Those are restitution, which is restoring people to their situation prior to a violation; compensation, so paying people economically accessible damages; rehabilitation, which might be medical, psych, or legal social care; satisfaction, which is acknowledgement, declarations, truth commissions, tributes; and then finally, guarantees of non-repetition. And guarantees of non-repetition are preventing future harm and review and change to laws that allow or would allow for future harm. And so in thinking about whether or not New York's cannabis social equity policy or other social equity policies across the country are going to be able to reach reparative goals, or at least their stated reparative goals, we've tried to match some of the aspects of the policies to these important components of the reparations framework. And one thing that we've noted is a lack of attention to guarantees of non-repetition, which also is a concept that sort of directly speaks to the intersection of our two practice areas, right? So a guarantee of non-repetition and a decriminalizing scheme that centered on repair from the war on drugs would mean, at the very least, that the machinery of the war on drugs would also be stilled through these policies, that there would be full decriminalization, that people who are incarcerated because of marijuana charges are no longer incarcerated, that it would no longer impact parole, probation, family custodial rights. And so one of our thoughts is that potentially our projects, the work that we're doing, can be attentive to this aspect as well. That speaks to the intersection of ongoing criminalization and the need to still the forms of policing and drug regulation that were promoted through the war on drugs, and stilling that being an important part of the social equity project.
Oops. Sorry. Okay.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we are doing and kind of what this project looks like, because I think we're really trying to think through and in real time really think about what we're doing, right? What's the work that we're doing? The work that's the main focus of today's talk is the work that our clinics are providing. We're providing ongoing legal services and policy and advocacy support related to the rollout of marijuana social equity policies. And we're working with organizational community partners. Both our clinics are providing both individual client representation as well as community education and policy work. For the individual client work, the Entrepreneurship and Community Development Clinic that Tomica and I are at the helm of, we are representing clients who have received what we call the CARD application, and they actually are formally or justice involved individuals, and they received the license from the state of New York, and they're actually going to start their business. So we have small business clients in the clinic that are going through the social equity process. So we're providing them with transactional representation. And Amber's clinic is also working on expungement and sealing of records for some clients as well. So that's kind of on the individual side of things. And as far as the community education piece, we are trying to educate our community about the complicated and evolving social equity programming that exists. The legalization laws happened in 2021. Is that right? Yeah, 2021. Social equity rollout was in 2022. In the last year, since then, there have been many different changes to the social equity programming. And so we've tried to stay on top of that. And one of the things that we did is we collaborated with the Manhattan Borough President I think early last summer, and we had a panel where we invited members of the community to provide education about the social equity rollout. So in addition to the ongoing work that we're doing with our clinics and the collaboration, we have decided to initiate a few writing projects stemming from this work. And so we wanted to tell you a little bit about those, and just given that awesome explanation that Amber just did about the reparations framework that we're thinking about we're writing a paper that is examining this rollout, and we're specifically considering the programs through that reparations framework. So this paper is going to be about the current effort to repair the harm of the war on drugs. Our state is trying to build wealth for those formerly incarcerated by over-enforcement of marijuana, over-enforcement of drugs, of the drug war through the social equity program. So we're investigating the limits of those policies in our paper, and we're thinking about the important consequences of those limits in terms of how we think about reparations in this particular context. And then maybe we can apply that reparations framework on a global scale. We're thinking about reparations in other contexts. So that's our major writing project. And then we're thinking about we have an idea to have a paper that's describing the pedagogy of teaching across our two disparate disciplines, that's going to describe the cross-disciplinary lawyering interventions needed, particularly around reparation strategies. And lastly, we've received a grant last year from Columbia's Richmond Policy Center, and we're going to use that grant to develop a white paper with model policy and other recommendations for social equity rollouts, which is explicitly linking the success of any equity program an opportunity to decriminalization and non-repetition of harm. And those recommendations are going to stem from our interviews and our collaboration with organizers and advocates around the country who we've been speaking with that have had some and shared their thoughts and their work about what would have been better policies or what would have been better areas in the legislation. So we're hoping that we can develop a white paper with some model policy recommendations. I think I'm talking about benefits. We're going to talk about benefits before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the work, just to sell you on that first. So before we get into the details of the specifics of the project, we thought we would talk about the benefits. So we've been doing this work and we've been teaching, and I think that we didn't really give much thought to the benefits of it, aside from the three of us getting to spend time together and work with our students, which is a huge benefit. But we didn't really get to think about the benefits until we had the opportunity to reflect on those benefits by putting together this webinar. So what we thought is that first, this is an emerging field, and I think that's a benefit. And maybe you'll see when we have the challenges, that's also a curse, right? It's a blessing and a curse. Marijuana was legalized in New York in March 21. Social equity programs were launched last year. It's an area where no one is an expert. And that's a benefit. We are learning together with the community, with advocates, with government officials, with policy advisors. We're learning together and we're learning from each other. And I think that has been really exciting. And that's been the true benefit of this project. I think lawyering across silos, that's a thing in academia. People love to talk about getting out of our silos, and we are actually having the opportunity to do that. And we're doing that in the interest of service to our community. And it's really great to see that there's a room and demand for each of our skill sets and talents. And so there's no one right way to attack this problem or to think about coming up with solutions in this area, that both sort of a transactional expertise is needed, and so is a litigation and criminal expertise. And then I would say that we have developed a deeper understanding of the war on drugs and interlocking systems of injustice. And I speaking for myself as a business lawyer, as a transaction lawyer, it's something that I don't think I had a real appreciation or understanding of in a deeper way. And so I think we've developed that. And New York, the MRTA that Tomica described, it's one of the strongest racial justice and repair social equity programs in the country. And it's heavily guided by communities of directly affected people and advocates. But it's not a perfect language. It's not a perfect statute. The policies aren't perfect. And so we're really learning about how deep the interlocking systems of injustice are, even when we're putting people who are affected at the forefront of bringing around change. So the passage of the act was celebrated by groups who are deeply engaged in the decrim of drugs and the provision of resources to criminalized communities. And even then, there's so much room and space for critique because those that repair that New York was putting forward, as progressive as it was at the time when the legislation was announced, it still tells us that there are affected people who are still affected, and that it's not a perfect solution. And the benefit is that we are able to work in partnership with affected people and empower them to sort of tell us what work is needed and then to operate from that space. And then lastly, we haven't mentioned our students, but exposing our students to this complex racial and social justice issue and systematic barriers of the systems to change in real time. It's not a fight that we're fighting from the past. We're doing it in real time. It's happening in the present day, and it's happening right here in front of us. And from our perspective as business lawyers and transactional lawyers, I don't know that we would have had this opportunity to really delve into the complexities of the issues in this way without this work. So that is a benefit. And I guess speaking to our shift in approach, I think it's hard to articulate, but the benefit of working with someone from an entirely different discipline to get the opportunity to work on something with someone who's teaching us something that's new, right? To work with a litigator, to work with students who are litigators, who are fully immersed in criminal defense, and vice versa. I think for them to speak with us about entrepreneurship and business law, and then taking all of our talents, our energies, and focusing on systems and power and developing a deeper understanding of the complexities of the problem, and that all of those skill sets are necessary and needed, and having that opportunity for us to attack the interlocking systems of injustice is really a great benefit.
I would echo the benefit from my perspective of having colleagues like Lynnise and Tomica, who, although they come from very different fields, we have a set of shared values, and we've been able to sort of magnify those and really explore those on the work in this project. So that in of itself has been a gift, just like the relationship and connection to my clinical peers, who really are, I think, working towards a vision of the same thing, of health for our communities, resources for our communities, but just coming from very different practice areas. So I'm going to talk about some of the teaching tools and strategies. Some of these we have used, some of these are in process and more aspirational, but they are teaching tools and strategies that we think are create particularly potent opportunities for learning within the context of doing work towards reparations or applying reparations frameworks. One of the first is contextualizing the problems for students. And in thinking about that, it's an opportunity for our students to think about a reparations project, which is a big project, right? It's addressing a huge scope of harm. We know that the policies that we have today cannot cure all of that harm. And so it's also visionary, but asking students to take the moments of representation that they already engaged in and to think about how that intersects with this larger project, right? So in a way, it makes the larger project more real, and it also expands and challenges the type of lawyering that students might be engaged in their smaller one-on-one individual or small organizational representation. So we've had our students do a few things. Some is to learn with us, so really engage in research of known harms of the war on drugs, which even within just our two areas is an expansive sort of area of trying to pull together information, and also noting what information doesn't exist or is hard to quantify. We ask students in every class to do quick writes, which is sort of reflection. I mean, you don't know quick writes for clinicians, but using the quick writes as an opportunity to reflect on how the current work may intersect with the larger project. And so in the work that's specific to reparations, the reparations project advocacy, there's an opportunity for students to connect what they're doing one-on-one to that broader vision for justice. There's also teaching about reparations generally. And again, this is sort of co-learning with students, and not just with students, but also with organizers. So one of the things that has been truly sort of like a wind in our sails or inspirational about being part of this project are that the people who we've met and spoken with who are doing work in this area are really students and scholars, ongoing students and scholars of this history. They're learning from elders, they are learning from other movements, and they are sending us resources as well. So some of the things that we've collected for teaching students come directly from the things that people are using as models or inspiration for this post-cannabis legalization reparations project. So some come from learning more about the history and strategies of litigation for reparations related to the Japanese American concentration camps. Recently, we shared Robin D.G. Kelly, A Day of Reckoning, Dreams of Reparations, which is a chapter from Freedom Dreams, The Radical Black Imagination. There's investigating reparations frameworks internationally, and then opportunities to think about this conversation of reparations outside of what's already been written in academic or scholarly literature. So Lynnise and Tomica's clinic visit an exhibit on redlining and gentrification, which evokes some of these themes. And last year we did, or earlier this year, we did an artist talk with an artist in residence here at the law school, but his work was centered on the Tulsa race massacre. And so also thinking about other sites where reparations projects have been applied or where it evokes the themes of this project. There's power mapping exercises with students. So thinking about, particularly in thinking about expanding reparative policies, being in conversation with advocates and city officials, understand where the pressure points might be for decriminalization advocacy, who we can move, what to do with comments, who are the players. This is a very local project, right? So states are doing it, sometimes even cities are engaged in this. So who are the very local players that can be moved behind initiatives? There's also focused attention on collaboration. So separately, pre this project within our clinics, we do a class and focus some attention on the small groups of students that were working together on projects. And so that was collaboration classes might center on personal working styles, using a quiz to help students suss out their working styles and think about strategies for working better together. But here with students that are working, students who are paired from across clinics, there's opportunity to think about collaboration, not just from individual working styles, but also individual fields. Like the students are engaged in very different forms of lawyering outside of that project. And so what does that mean about how they approach cases, the strategies that they have in setting up client meetings? We're coming from different areas of practice, and so are our students. And so there's opportunities to talk about what sort of collaborative strategies are necessary in cross-discipline work together. And then always critical race theory. So this project necessarily requires that we incorporate critical race lens on each of our fields. And I think that's something that we both have had as a part of our clinics, but this project brings out the necessity for applying those lenses to criminal law, business and transactional law. And it's a necessary component of thinking about what repair is needed post-criminalization, and if and whether and how enterprise can serve as a form of repair. And then finally, thinking about grounding students in the discipline of community lawyering, because there's so much conversation around these policies and how they impact communities very specifically, students have been able to be a part of seeing how those conversations are emerging in light of this very new policy. And so that can mean a few things. It might mean necessarily inviting in advocates who can explain some of their framing of the reparations project. But for us, one thing that's been interesting is that because this is a topic that many people are interested in the city, local community boards have been having sessions on the social, on the marijuana legalization emerging economy and its emerging economy. And so we ask students to sit in on community board meetings in different parts of the city and hear how those policies are being perceived in different parts of the city, whether or not they're even truly being perceived and received as a reparations or reparative project. So those are some of the teaching tools that we have used or aspire to use in the cross-clinic collaboration on lawyering towards reparations. Tomica is going to give sort of a stronger sense of the work that we're doing.
Hello again. So Amber talked about the tools, and I'm just going to talk more about some of the outward facing work that we've been doing thus far. So first with the card licenses, we were actually on the ground for the first set of recreational use licenses that were issued. As you can imagine, the applications were very lengthy and they required a really extensive knowledge of both transactional law concepts, business formation, understanding those types of things. And applicants also had to be able to access and report on their past marijuana convictions. So we as a clinic went down to a community group and sat down with actual applicants. And it's really been exciting to see some of the folks who we helped who were eventually issued licenses to open their dispensaries. Also with community partners, we've designed limited engagement pop-up clinics where we get to work with clients one-on-one. And an example of that, which was previously mentioned, was an expungement clinic to get past marijuana convictions cleared. And we also are talking about providing more support with applications for future licenses that are coming down the pipe. Additionally, we are working with community groups to create accessible resource guides. The regulations can be really dense and somewhat confusing, and we're really assisting with that work of distilling what's in the regulations so that social equity applicants and all applicants can really have full participation in this process. And the law, as far as comments are concerned, Amber touched on this a little bit, but the law is drafted in such a way that the bill does a lot of the heavy lifting of legalizing marijuana, but the regulations are released periodically, which really get into the nitty-gritty of how the law is going to work. And each time regulations are passed, there's an open public comment period. And so we've been working with community groups to draft the public comments based on the concerns that are coming up from their constituents and put them in for the public comment period so that they could hopefully eventually be incorporated in the new regulations. And finally, through our conversations with advocates, we're getting so much constructive criticism of the law and how it could be drafted to be more equitable. And so as a result of this, as Lynnise mentioned, we are drafting model legislation that should be incorporated in our white paper for states well, for any revisions of the law here in New York, or even for the other 20-something states that are going to go on to legalize marijuana. And so I'm passing it off to Lynnise now, who is going to talk about some of the challenges that we've faced in our work.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned the benefit was learning new vocabulary and learning a new skill set, but of course you can imagine that that's also a challenge. You know, I never thought as a business lawyer that I'd be thinking about reparations frameworks and repair frameworks and reparations lawyering and working alongside advocates and organizers. So that has been a challenge, one that we've embraced, but still a challenge nonetheless. And as Amber mentioned, you know, I think she never thought she'd be using words like entrepreneurship and business and corporation and all those things. So it's been just a mutual exchange of learning new vocabulary and developing new skill sets. You know, again, I also said a benefit was the emerging field and that we're all learning together. That's a benefit and a challenge. We don't know things and we don't know a lot of things, and that can be hard. I think the benefit of that, the challenge of that is that we have each other to kind of figure that out. And we are also modeling that for students. But as you can imagine, that is challenging to just say that we don't know a lot of things. And I think, you know, from a collaboration perspective, there's challenges. There's reasons why people work in silos because it can just be easier. So there's just challenges to work with organizers, to develop community partners. It's just everyone has different working styles, different language around working and approaches. And so that is incredibly challenging. The work can then slow down and be very slow as we try to figure out ways that we can work with lots of diverse advocates and parties in this work. And I would say the last challenge, which is a big one, is the ideological pushback. We call it pushback or resistance from the establishment. I think one of the is, you know, that we're talking about the drug war, we're talking about reparations. These are topics that I think evoke a lot of different emotions for people, and it challenges a lot of the establishment. And then I think one of the biggest constraints to that, to social equity, might also be constitutional challenges. There's potential for courts to strike down race-conscious measures. Another is for the court to strike down measures that are preferential treatment for certain business owners. So any reparation strategy is going to have to deal with ideological pushback, but then also the real pushback of where our federal courts are in this moment in time. So I think we're going to get to questions in a minute. We have a few takeaways that we're just going to shout out. And I think I think we've talked a lot about the takeaways as we've incorporated them in our remarks, but I think the necessity for thinking about reparations lawyering and approaching it from a theory of change is something that I think we didn't anticipate doing initially, and to have that theory of change be informed by organizers and advocates that have been doing this work for decades. And so that's kind of that's something that has been valuable to us, and something that we would recommend for others, is thinking about lawyering sort of on behalf of and alongside of and with and in the name of and in service of community organizers.
Another takeaway is that this is an impossible project, I think, to approach from one particular field and not reach across different disciplines to have even just an understanding of the goals, the vision, and the components, the necessary components of repair. So it's been wonderful to enter into these conversations with people who are very versed across criminal law, across Black community economic development, and to have partners who really have an expertise that I don't have. And also has been, I think, really sort of affirming, that as a practitioner, I can enter a different space with folks and even spaces outside of criminal law or business law, and that we can find sort of the entry point for our practice areas, but then also begin to understand something much bigger than our sort of siloed off areas. And so this project, the issues are complex and necessarily requires different tactics to push for true reparations.
And I just want to echo what Lynnise and Amber said, that we've really had to take our cues from the community. And though the industry is new, the work is not, and it's really layered. It's marijuana legalization work, it's also war on drugs work, it's reparations work. And I think we're doers, and instead of really diving in like we normally do and saying, oh, we're just going to do this license clinic and get in and out, we've really had to listen and like pause. And I think as attorneys, like we always want to be client focused, but in this context with reparations, like I think we've been doing more listening than we even typically do, because we're like students of all of this. So we're students, and then our students are students, and it really is it's a shift for me.
Yeah, and then the last takeaway is that this collaboration has really been a wonderful opportunity for our students to see and understand systematic oppression, and to understand multiple institutions and how those institutions often serve to maintain the status quo. So they're seeing how layered it is, both from a business perspective, a small business and community development perspective, and also a criminal defense perspective. So that's our presentation. I know Amber has to teach, so she might have to log off, but Tomica and I are here. We'd love to, first of all, know if you have any readings for best practices or cross-clinic collaborations. If you want to share those with us in the chat, we are open and looking to learn. Also indicate in the chat whether you might consider participating in a cross-clinic collaboration, and indicate what benefit such a collaboration might have for your clinics. And then also, just if you have a question, we are open to it. If you want to turn off your mics, open your mics, whatever it's called, and we will answer your question. Otherwise, thank you so much.
I see Mary.
Okay, I'm just so amazed, and it's incredible to think of the students' opportunity here to be attacking a brand new law that is designed to be fair. I mean, when do you ever get that? And all the other things you described about the process of learning. And I was wondering if your students have been steeped in firsthand experiences, either of the organizing or any other aspect of this that they've brought into the clinic.
Yeah, I would say that we are taking a lot of credit to say that this is what we're doing, but you should understand that when we say we, it's mostly our students. Our students are attending community board meetings. Our students are doing a lot of the interviews of organizers. They actually know a lot more than we do. So they're doing as much as we've described, they're doing most of this work. Tomica, did you want to add? I don't know if you.
Yeah, I mean, from a very practical perspective, one of our students is he's incorporating a nonprofit of all of the card license holders, which is really exciting for him, because he was sort of working from last semester and he's carried on to have a client, and he is really steeped in it. So, I think that we're getting to experience this in real time and like read about our clients in the news as they open dispensaries. So it's very, very cool.
Carolyn?
Yeah, hi, thank you all. I'm sorry I don't have my camera on, but I just wanted to say thank you for this presentation. I came in a little late, so I'm sorry if you covered this, but just on your last point about cross-clinic collaboration, I'm wondering, are there clinics you would like to collaborate with? You're talking about there's so much you don't know. And I'd be really interested in hearing, having done this work, what additional expertise would you love to work with? What other kinds of clinics would you love to work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, a policy and advocacy clinic, I think our orientation in our clinic, we do individual client service and then we do community education work, but we don't do policy and advocacy work. And I think a lot of the work we're doing in this collaboration is policy and advocacy. And I just think that there's so much learning that we could have from clinic directors and clinics that do mostly policy and that do mostly advocacy, because it's just a completely different way of teaching and approaching, you know, the law. So that's the clinic I would love to collaborate with.
Yeah, and for me, I think a civil litigation clinic, just because some of the strategies that have come up among advocates are taking like a pure litigation route, and they want to do test cases, and I think that just being an interest aspect to incorporate into our work, or just to expose the students to.
Yeah, I second that too.
So we are about at time. I just want to thank our presenters again on an amazing presentation, and also just what sounds to be a truly innovative and exciting project. I mean, I think we all sort of boast cross-clinic collaboration as a goal or a value, and to hear how you all have put this together and not just engage students in like the mechanical work, but in actual critique for how the law is affected and how justice can be achieved. It's just extraordinary, and I'm really inspired. So thank you so much, and thank you for being a wonderful finale to our incredible year. This is our last session of the 2022-23 school year, and please stay tuned for our notes and updates about what we plan for next year. And we hope to see many of you at the AALS conference just at the end of the month. So thanks so much for everyone for joining, and thanks again to our amazing presenters.
Thank you.
Thank you.